So I want to show you a third and a fourth species counterpoint. So here on the bottom I have a third species counterpoint. Third species means having four notes in one voice versus the one note in the given cantus firmus. Right? So this is the given melody, the given cantus firmus, and the counterpoint has quarter notes while the cantus firmus has whole notes. I already wrote the analysis in between the generic intervals. We should remember that there are very strict rules about approaching perfect consonances. Perfect consonances can only occur if they are approached in contrary motion or oblique motion. So whenever we see a 1, a 5, or an 8, then they must be approached by oblique or in contrary motion. Here it is by oblique motion, one voice is held, the other voice moves. Here it is also approached in oblique motion since the upper voice remains steady. Here it is oblique motion because the lower voice is sustained. Here it's the lower voice again, the oblique motion. Here we have contrary motion. This octave is approached in contrary motion. Here in oblique motion, since the note in the lower voice is held. This octave is approached in contrary motion. Let's see. Here we have an octave in the fifth, which is approached in oblique motion, the octave in oblique motion here, the fifth in oblique motion. So whenever it's really important to look at those whenever the perfect consonance falls on a first beat in a measure. In this case, this is contrary motion, contrary motion. Here it was oblique motion. And here at the very end it is also approached in contrary motion. And then there are very strict rules on how to approach and resolve dissonances. And in second species we already saw dissonances being approached and resolved by step, and the dissonances could only fall on beats other than the downbeat, other than the first beat of a measure. In third species this is the same, so we do not see any dissonances on the first beats of a measure. They can only be on the second quarter, third or fourth quarter. The fourth is considered a dissonance, and it must be approached either by step or we may also have something like incomplete neighbors, or we may have a nota cambiata, which I encourage you to look up. Wikipedia has a very nice article on nota cambiata. In this case, the fourth is approached by step and resolved by step. Here the seventh, the dissonance, is approached and resolved by step in the same direction. Here this fourth as well, step in the same direction. Here is a fourth, approached and left in the same direction. Here we have an octave in the fourth, which is approached and left, resolved in the same direction. The second as well here. Here the second, approached and resolved in the same direction. And here is one more fourth as well, approached and resolved in the same direction. Let's actually listen to how this counterpoint sounds like. Let me start over. Of course they start together. about that. Let me play the second to last measure. Of course, it must end on a perfect consonant. So we need to watch out how to approach the perfect consonances, and also how to approach and resolve all the dissonants, which can never be on a first quarter note in a measure in third species counterpoint. Up here I have an example of a fourth species counterpoint, and fourth species counterpoint is what we later call suspensions. And suspensions do fall on the first part of a measure. They create a lot of tension and are being resolved. And whenever there is a suspension figure that has a dissonance on the first beat of a measure, it must be resolved down by step. In this case here, it is not a dissonance, so you can actually leap away from it. But here we have the interval of a seventh, and it must be resolved down by step. Here we have a perfect interval. We can go up, we can leap away or go up. Consonants as well, but whenever it's a dissonance, it must be resolved down by step. So whenever we have these suspension figures, then that same note is approached as a consonant, then is repeated or tied over, and becomes a dissonance with a change of bass, and then is resolved down by step. We see another one here. So the E here is a perfect consonant, but then with a change of bass, the E being tied over becomes a seventh and must be resolved down by step, and then resolves in contrary motion to the perfect octave. Also, of course, whenever we have a perfect interval on a first beat, it must be approached in contrary or oblique motion, in this case in contrary motion. So how does this sound? Dissonance, resolved. Where am I? I got lost here. Dissonance. Dissonance. This is where I got lost, and the reason I got lost because we actually have crossed voices. Crossed voices are usually avoided. A crossed voice if the lower voice is higher than the higher voice and the upper voice. But we occasionally see that if we have an octave displacement in the voice, and then the other voice quickly leaps away to basically re-establish our normal order where the higher voice is higher than the lower voice. So very briefly we can see that, but normally it is avoided. And so it's a bit more difficult to read. But again, it was very nice whenever we had the dissonances, there was a lot of tension, and that tension was then resolved stepwise down. It cannot be stepwise up, what we would later call retardations. Those are not used in species counterpoint, only the suspension figures where they are resolved down by step.